Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your early morning briefing for Tuesday, the 22nd of July, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby, and with that, let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway here. Starting with the latest coming from the Director of National Intelligence. So we've actually seen yesterday, OD and I released the Martin Luther King files, and I haven't seen anything come from that other than some news coverage, which really focused on how opposed the family was to the release of those documents. But the Trump administration says this is in the fairness of transparency. And speaking of transparency, it looks like we've moved maybe beyond this into maybe an era of accountability. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard sent the Department of Justice all of the files that they have related to her report that Obama-era officials had manufactured the Russian collusion narrative in 2016. Gabbard called for, quote, every person involved in this she said, every person involved in this conspiracy must be investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. I already see it in the chat. No indictments. Yeah, I could be wrong. I would have to go back and double check. But going back to like the Church and Pike committees, which opened the books of FBI and CIA to find some just pretty egregious extra legal activities, I don't think anyone went to jail. I could be wrong. I would have to go back and double check. Somehow, I doubt anyone goes to jail over this. But she is at least asking for accountability. A strongly worded letter, as is usually the case in Washington, D.C. Speaking of strongly worded letters, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called for an exhaustive internal review of the Federal Reserve's quote-unquote non-monetary policy operations. And Bessent believes that this review would quote, go a long way towards strengthening the Fed's credibility with the American people. Jared, actually, you wrote this. Does this have to do mainly, I think the Fed was trying to spend $2.5 billion to renovate the big Fed office in D.C. Is this over those renovations, or is this?
It certainly pertains to that. Best inside of that, he's like, hey, he didn't say, hey, yeah, this is costing us billions of dollars. He said, you guys usually run $100 billion deficit, and you're making a massive new renovation over on Constitution Avenue. Maybe that looks bad. We should address this.
So you're just talking about like an operational budget. The Fed runs a $100 billion loss every year. How in the world does it cost $100 billion to run the Fed?
I will pull it back
more, up. whatever it costs, minus another $100 billion.
Yeah,
that's nuts.
More operating losses of more than $100 billion per year.
Yeah, amazing. Well, then it sounds like it's high time to audit and investigate the Fed. Figure out what they're spending all that money on. You know, I remember back during Biden, Lael Brainerd was at the Fed. She was the vice chair of the Fed, and she had implemented all these policies about how the Fed needs to go investigate climate change, and the Fed needs a thorough review of all their policies to see what the impact is and how to remake the Fed into kind of or add maybe a third plank for the Fed of instituting social justice through monetary policy. Just absolutely insane thing. So hopefully the Treasury Secretary in his office is able to get to the bottom of this and clear out some of that. The social justice stuff, it just has no role in monetary policy, but that's what we lived through for 4+ years. All right. Also, the Pentagon has now ordered those 700 Marines who were deployed to Los Angeles. They are now being redeployed back to 29 Palms. And those Marines, by the way, were tasked with security at 2 federal facilities during ICE enforcement operations. You know, at the time they said that that operation started in early June, and they said it would take 30 to 60 days. So it does look like they're winding down operations in LA. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to phase these operations, but I know ICE under Operation Safeguard have previously said they're going to go in and maybe conduct those kind of surge-style enforcement operations in cities like Portland and New York and Chicago. I think there may be 4 or 5 cities on that list. So we may see National Guard deployed again to another city before all is said and done. And we may be seeing that maybe in the next 30 days. All right, with that, also yesterday there was a question about this Customs and Border Protection agent who was shot in New York City. And yesterday, DHS arrested a second illegal alien in that attempted armed robbery of this off-duty Customs and Border Protection officer in New York. They are saying this is a robbery. This is not like a targeted assassination like we've seen previous attempts with ICE. This CBP officer did thwart the robbery by shooting the illegal aliens. He himself, however, sustained gunshot wounds to his arm and cheek. And acting ICE Director Todd Lyons issued a statement blaming the Biden administration for the shooting, as both of those illegal aliens were caught and later released into the United States back during the Biden term. Also, Jared, this is your item, but let's just cover it briefly. So the State Department has issued they have declared many of these foreign and transnational gangs. They've actually declared them as foreign terrorist organizations. And one of those gangs that is now a foreign terrorist organization is from Haiti. And apparently the State Department is going after them. So what do we know?
Yes. So back in May, the State Department declared 2 Haitian gangs to be FTOs there. And just yesterday, they ordered the removal of all Haitian nationals who have supported or collaborated with Viv and Sam, which is one of the ones that was just recently declared a Haitian gang, foreign terrorist organization. So they're going after the support network as well, not just members. And actually, just yesterday, ICE announced an arrest in support of that mission by the State Department, but they announced it from an arrest that was last week. So they apparently got advance notice. Hey, this is coming down the pipe. Start arresting Haitians that you've been investigating for this kind of behavior here. So they are at least already taking action on this order.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. And lastly, here in the domestic sit rep, before we move to global, the country's largest orange juice distributor filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration over this. Right now, it's just a proposed 50% tariff that is going to be placed on Brazil. Brazil, by the way, produces about half of all orange juice that is sold in the United States. And this company, Joanna Foods, their CEO, said that orange juice prices are going to increase by up to 20 to 25% across the boards if this tariff is implemented. And I believe that starts on August 1st, along with another huge round of tariffs. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into the global sit rep. Jared, welcome back. Go ahead.
All right. We're going to start off in Spain. So, Spain, but also coming from Congress here. Last week, Senator Tom Cotton and Representative Rick Crawford, both Republicans out of Arkansas and both chairs of their respective intelligence committees for the chamber, sent a joint letter to Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, to review and consider revoking intelligence sharing agreements with Spain. Now, the reason for all this is that the Spanish Interior Ministry awarded Huawei a contract for data storage of police wiretap data in Spain. That's a lot looser over in Spain, over in Europe, really, for who can be monitored where. And the big concern here is we have a naval station over in Spain, right next to the Strait of Gibraltar, and Spain oversees the Strait of Gibraltar. So, you can actually get advanced warning on NATO movements if you are overseeing it, which that strait is extremely narrow. And if I remember right, even bisected by a small island as well. It is not hard to just monitor that entire thing for traffic. Mm-hmm. Then moving much closer to home, a Chinese man working in Southern California for various defense contractors over the past more than a decade pled guilty to sending thousands of files of secret and trade secret data back to China. From 2014 to 2022, this man applied to numerous Chinese-run talent programs, attempting to sell plans for night vision goggles, high-performance converters for radars, and missile navigation technology, anything he could get his hands on. Basically, if he was working for a company, he'd go back to China and say, hey, I want to sell this to you, and just do it openly. Cheng Guangdong also, in the latest one, the incident that got him wrapped up, sold 3,600 files pertaining to missile tracking and space sensors between March and April of 2023. Just 1 month. Now, the U.S. Attorney's Office says that Gong actually remains free on a $1.7 million bond. Mm-hmm. So he's still out.
Jared, is this a Chinese national or a U.S.
Sure
citizen?
Is.
How in the world? Well, let me just say this. This country has a lot of problems. One of the reasons, on yesterday's show, and really for about 10 years now, I've said, the future of the United States is going to be very different. I actually do think the left and the right both are probably in a foot race towards authoritarianism. But you want to look at the future of quote-unquote democracy. I'm not sure in the 21st century that a successful country is going to be run in an open system like we have, where foreign nationals can come in and get jobs working in very sensitive sectors. And I don't care what their tech bona fides are. I don't care what their talents are or what their qualifications are. It is just insane that the United States continues to allow Chinese nationals access to our defense networks, to our defense contracting companies, to our sensitive technologies. This is not politically correct. We're never concerned with political correctness here. But I just want to reiterate, John Schindler, who I'm hesitant to mention, but he was a counterintelligence agent, and he worked at NSA and Navy and some other places. And he said many years ago, he said, if you want to stop probably 90% of Chinese espionage, you simply block Chinese nationals from working in sensitive industries in the United States. You block them altogether and they can no longer do it. And that is how you stop most Chinese espionage. And there's obviously not the political will. I'm sure even if the Trump administration tried to do that, some federal judge somewhere would try to block it. It may go to the Supreme Court. But it's absolutely insane that we continue to allow this to happen. And then we're shocked when, another Chinese national sending secret information back to China.
Yeah.
It's pitiful. I mean, it really is.
It's worth renoting those dates too. 2014 to 2022 is when he's doing all this. And China really moved from a regional power to near peer, if not peer power in that time frame. Mm-hmm. Like that. I don't really have anything else to say aside from like this guy probably materially contributed to China's actual hard power rise. And he's free on bond.
Right. Yeah.
He's walking and has known to go back to China. Mm-hmm. Like he could just leave. And he's in Southern California. He could.
Well, I would hope he gets stopped at the airport, but there's no. I'm sure he could slip into Canada or Mexico. Well, maybe not now, but at any rate, yeah. Just a couple of things here, just on this topic, and I do reiterate this story from time to time. Recall that even Biden, just talking about the future of democracy, that Biden recounted this conversation that he had with Xi Jinping, and I'm guessing that it happened. And it's not like a corn pop story where Biden just makes it up, but Biden said in a phone call that he had with Chinese President Xi Jinping, she told him that democracy will not work in the 21st century. And Biden's response to that says, well, no, we have to prove it works by being open and inclusive and diverse. And we're going to prove that diverse democracies work. And they just simply will not work in the 21st century. Not with what we're about to go through in this country. All right, Jared. Enough of that. But just bottom line, I don't think the United States survives as an open society like we have. I really don't. I do not see it happening. With that, let's go ahead and continue on and move down to Latin America.
All right. So this is the Democracy Summit that you've been talking about for a couple of weeks. The heads of state for Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Spain, and Uruguay all released a joint statement at their Democracy Always Summit. Now, this statement, it is largely fluff. I picked out the most important parts here. They called for further democratization of the United Nations, which is something I've seen China call for quite a bit. Kind of ironically there. But this also included overcoming blockages, their words, from the Security Council veto. They also called for a ceasefire in Gaza, and they were just generally affirming liberal democracy. So gender equality, LGBT stuff, all that. The attendees also claimed to have a roadmap to present at the next United Nations General Assembly in order to bring more nations on board with this, what they're calling a global initiative in defense of democracy, human rights, and social justice. So they want to bring many more people on here. And I have noticed that as these kinds of things are introduced at the United Nations, a lot of the nations glom on, even if they're not necessarily democratic, because it's easy to exploit these things.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, particularly if you're not on the Security Council, it's easy to go, okay, hey, we're in a bigger block now. We can affect our own will here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone mentioned yesterday that they asked, maybe somewhat rhetorically, why wouldn't China continue to prop up democracies in the West because they're so exploitable? Which is a fair question to ask.
Yeah.
Right. And just by the way, you remember it was a few months ago. All these months are running together for me now, but it seems like it was just a few months ago. You remember what happened in Romania? We had this presidential election, and then the election results were overturned because of the country's Supreme Court of the government said that it was corrupt, and this guy was backed by Russia, and we got to redo the elections. And then they just did it until they got the president they won, I think. Yeah. I would not be surprised to see something like that happen in South America over the next 18 months as these major countries have their presidential elections. With that, let's go ahead and move on to Great Britain. Not so great anymore, but possibly hosting U.S. nuclear weapons. That's a big change.
That is a big change. So Russia says it's monitoring the reports that the U.S. has moved a couple of thermonuclear gravity bombs, so not missiles, but actual true nuclear bombs, to the RAF Lakenheath base. Now, these would be on American platforms, used by the United States Air Force, but they are stationed there. These reports come from the UK Defense Journal, and it reports that neither US nor UK officials have confirmed it, but they don't, you're not going to confirm that you moved a nuke. Just plain and simple. Mm-hmm. Now, that journal did note that this would be the first time a nuclear weapon has been in the United Kingdom since 2008, when there was a whole spate of denuclearization moves back in the 2000s. Mm. Notably, this would pretty significantly change the balance of power there, because you're putting American nukes back on the island there, and they're run from F-35s, which have a pretty significant range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess, Jared, this kind of goes back to Russia moving nuclear weapons into Belarus. Just looking at this here, I mean, are we going to see Russia move nukes to another third-party country in response? I mean, there's really west of there's really nowhere that Russia could potentially move nukes to, but
not unless they go to Kaliningrad. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think we're going to see a renewed nuclear posturing, because we covered probably 6 months ago now, the French where they implemented a plan to move their nukes close enough, and if you mapped out the ranges like we did, it's just close enough to hit Moscow. It's all about posturing, similar to the Cold War.
Mm-hmm. By the way, speaking of Kaliningrad, just a couple of months ago, Russia actually did hold drills simulating nuclear launches from Kaliningrad. So maybe they're already there. And don't quote me, I could be absolutely wrong, but I do seem to recall a lot of talk about Russian nukes already being in Kaliningrad. But again, that's my memory may be hazy there. All right. And moving on.
Still speaking of nukes, the Navy announced a $1.7 billion price hike on its new Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, part of the nuclear triad. Now, this submarine is also 17 months behind schedule, so it's not expected to be delivered until spring of 2029 now. It was supposed to be October of 2027. And the Navy claims that inflation of material and labor costs are primarily what's driving the driving the price hike here. So basically, they saw almost $2 billion worth of inflation. And then moving over to Turkey, we've been covering the Israel, Druze, Syria Bedouin issues going on along the border. Israel's, basically saying, hey, we own this part of southern Syria now. It will be demilitarized, Golan Heights, all of that. Turkish President Erdogan told reporters yesterday that he's totally opposed to Israel's actions there and said that we are determined we will not leave President Ahmad al-Sharaa alone in Syria, and we do not want Syria to be fragmented, which Turkey right now is the new Syrian regime's primary security guarantor. So they have maybe not a vested interest in Syrian territorial integrity, but they at least are supporting the people who do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Turkey certainly does not want Israel to annex parts of southern Syria. And there has been talk out of Israel about annexing those Christian and Druze areas in southern Syria. So TBA, thanks for staying on top of that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on. Today we have about 58 protests happening, which is about baseline. Listen, before we move on, we're going to talk about a couple other things, but I just want to clarify something that I talked about on yesterday's show. And I don't know, Monday morning, but I had something backwards. I just want to clear it up. And it has to do with the potential gerrymandering attempts in Texas and California. And I related that directly back to the Irish Troubles. So let's go back to the late 1960s. One of the largest accelerators of violence in 1960s Northern Ireland, which we call the Irish Troubles, started when the Protestant minority in Derry, which is in Northern Ireland, part of the UK, used gerrymandering to lock out the city's Catholic majority from political power. So you had minority Protestants using gerrymandering to lock out Catholics from political power. Being the majority of that city and lacking representation and political control, a lot of Catholics felt that the political process was pointless and that redress was impossible. So they started up what they called a civil rights movement, and they held protests and marches and rallies. And their marches were attacked by Protestant mobs and also from the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which was a mainly Protestant kind of domestic police force. And after that, by the way, there's a really great documentary on this called the Ballymurphy Precedent. And the British Army deployed to Northern Ireland, and in one instance, they killed something like 10 unarmed Catholics who were in this Ballymurphy area. It's a very good documentary. But after that, some Catholics responded with armed violence themselves, and that kicked off this decades-long low-intensity conflict. And so when I watched this documentary, I immediately thought about what's happening in the United States right now, which is where you have the two largest U.S. states by population talking about a mid-decade redistricting, so redrawing the district lines for the express purpose of, for Republicans, potentially saving a House majority if Texas can do this with enough time and if it can clear the courts for the 2026 midterms. So last week, President Trump held a phone call with some Texas officials on plans to redistrict the state. And they want to produce 5 additional GOP House seats. In response, you have California Governor Gavin Newsom coming out and offering to redistrict California. It's going to be a lot more difficult for Democrat states. But he at least said if Republicans want to play hardball on this, then California can redistrict and remove potentially all 9 Republican seats that are currently held in California. And this is a strategic concern, not just for potentially radical changes in the House majority. You look at this, and it's not a leap to say that violence or potentially armed violence is possible if Texas, California, or any other state succeeds in redrawing district lines of majority party areas to minority party representation for the express purpose of retaining or expanding their political power. This is very brazen. I will admit that. It is basically unfathomable for me to consider either state doing this so brazenly, just literally coming out and saying, on the side of Republicans, we may lose the House. It's going to be close. We have a very narrow majority now, But if we redraw Texas, we can create 5 new states and maybe hang on. This is, I think, honestly, this is kind of not necessarily a do or die moment for the Trump administration, but certainly for the Trump agenda. Because if Democrats retake the House, they take control of all the major committees. And that's a lot of congressional power. Not to mention the Trump agenda effectively stops on January, 2027, if Democrats do take the House majority. I don't expect this to survive the courts, but if it does, there's going to be a lot of civil unrest. Here in Texas, Democrats are obviously the minority party, but they have massive networks. They have massive infrastructure. There's going to be a lot of protests, and sizable numbers of them here in Texas and maybe other states are going. I think Ohio maybe is actually talking about doing the same thing, doing this mid-decade redistricting, not waiting till 2030, doing it now and creating additional GOP House seats. But sizable number of Americans are going to turn to protest and civil disobedience at first, and potentially violent resistance. And, I say that just because there actually is a precedent here. This is exactly how there's a lot of causes of the Irish Troubles that extend for 800 years or however long, maybe longer. But this was the primary cause of the Irish Troubles. I mean, this is the main accelerator here. And so we see this lead to a violent conflict in another country. It's just not inconceivable to me that it could lead to something like that here in the United States. So this is something that I'm following, and we'll follow up on it as it progresses. I think Texas Republicans are fairly serious. I know the Trump administration is serious about it. This is maybe not necessarily a point of no return, but this is, the GOP keeps the House or the Trump agenda dies. That really is the bottom line, except for maybe what Trump could do through executive orders, which are, again, he's going to have issues in the courts with that as well. All right. With that out of the way, that's my mea culpa from yesterday. I just had to go back and re-explain that. Speaking of Trump world here, the Trump Media and Technology Group Corporation, that's the name of their company, announced the purchase of about $2 billion in Bitcoin and other crypto assets. And this is part of the company's strategy to become a crypto treasury company. According to, I didn't know this, Devin Nunes, the former California congressman, is now the CEO of Trump Media. And in this press release, he says, quote, "These assets help ensure our company's financial freedom, help protect us against discrimination by financial institutions, and will create synergies with the utility token we're planning to introduce across the Truth Social ecosphere." And apparently Truth Social, or the Truth Company, has a streaming service called Truth Plus. They've got a few other things called Truth. At any rate, they're building this massive kind of media and social space ecosystem, and they're going to introduce a token like Truth Coins or something like that, that's one of the reasons why they've bought all this Bitcoin and other assets. But I just want to point something out. Bitcoin this morning is up over $119,000, and that's just shy of an all-time high of $120,000. I remember Warren Buffett said Bitcoin's rat poison, and former JP Morgan Chase CEO current JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said, "Stay away from Bitcoin." I think he called it a fraud or something like that. And now here we are, Bitcoin sitting just off $120,000. Listen, I think Bitcoin has probably moved past the point of tulips. I don't know whether $120,000 per Bitcoin, I don't know whether that's a justified price or not. But I look at this entire space, and I remember going back, and I was telling friends and family, anybody who would listen to me on social media everywhere, I said, look, there's so much institutional money that is about to flow into Bitcoin. We're talking about major investment banks opening up Bitcoin purchases to institutional clients. There's so much money that's about to flow in here. They are going to pump the price up bigly. And that did end up happening. And so I would note that you have major U.S. investment banks that once shunned crypto. And that's JP Morgan Chase, that's Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. They now offer it to institutional clients. And all three of those banks have either deployed or they're building or in some phase of testing their own crypto payment systems. So this is something that I just see a lot more institutional adoption. And so people, you have this big finance guy, this trader on Twitter/X talking about, Bitcoin just completed its fifth Elliott wave. It's never going to go above $112,000 ever. Guys, everything that I'm seeing from this investment bank research, I read it every single day. I write the economic early warning report. I publish it every Friday. And I tell Forward Observer subscribers what these big banks are saying about the economy, what they're saying about the future of the dollar, what they're advising their clients on. And they're all talking about dollar weakness. The dollar is going to weaken versus foreign currencies. By necessity, the price of Bitcoin will go up, because when Bitcoin goes up, it's really not rising in price. The value of the dollar is going down. And if the value of the dollar is going down, other things will rise in price, just like we've seen with gold, other commodities. So just full disclosure here, I've owned Bitcoin since 2014. I'm not trying to sell anyone on Bitcoin. I think the future of Bitcoin is uncertain. It is extremely volatile. I mean, it's not unreasonable to expect that Bitcoin could shed 50% of its price at some point in the future. But over the long term, I do think it will gain it back because of a few things. Number one, then presidential candidate Trump campaigned on making the United States the crypto capital of the world. We see from the Trump administration major efforts to implement crypto-friendly policies, to implement policies that make it easier for Americans to use and purchase, invest in crypto assets. We see the Trump family trying to build this crypto empire. Also, major institutional investment companies getting behind decentralized finance. So Bitcoin to me, has obviously crossed the chasm. I'm not even going to talk about price, but just in terms of staying power, Bitcoin is here. You don't have to like it. You don't have to buy it. But, I just look at Bitcoin, and I actually do think there's a good case to be made that it remains a major asset class. Just last point here, and we'll move on. There's a fantastic book that I think everyone should read. If you want to understand the future, absolutely you have to go back and read this book. It's published in 1997. It's called The Sovereign Individual. And it's in audio form as well. It's like whatever major platforms. And the entire premise of this book is that the nation-state system as we know it is going to fail, because they break up periods of Western history into 500-year increments. And they say every roughly 500 years, you get technological advancements in the West, and they break these periods down into ages. So we've gone from the age of anarchy and plunder, starting at about 1000 AD. At 1500 AD, we hit the industrial age, and you have the gunpowder. And all of a sudden, during the feudal age, it went from age of anarchy and plunder to the feudal age to the industrial age, and now to the digital or information age. And with these technological advancements, they're not only economic and domestic, but they're also military. And so you have this age of feudalism where you have these knights. And a lot of people have these very romantic pictures of what a knight was. Knights were actually incredibly violent and destructive. And so what you had these knights basically rampaging in Europe. And you have all the peasants or the serfs. They go to their local knight and they say, "Will you protect us?" And the knight says, "Yeah, sure, of course. Just farm my lands and give me some of what you produce, and sure, I'll protect you." And that's the feudal age. At that time, a coat of armor costs probably, $100,000, $200,000. So this is something that only the very wealthy could afford. And a peasant or a serf versus a knight is not much of a fight. And then around 1500, you get this industrial age starting, the introduction of gunpowder. Rifles become far cheaper than suits of armor. All of a sudden, those armored knights aren't so big and bad anymore when they're staring down the barrel of a musket. And then so on and on and on. And then eventually, we get into the digital age. And the whole point of this book is that in the digital age, Just like we don't farm land and give a part of our produce to our lords. Eventually, they say nation states will go away. And this entire concept that human beings pay a tax to a government, a central government, to be a citizen is going away. And one of the main reasons that's going away is because of technological progression in money. Money started from, I don't know, seashells and beads or whatever. And then it went to precious metals, and then it went to paper, and now it's going to be digital. Because of the nature of cryptocurrencies, the immutable aspects, immutable qualities, these central governments are not going to be able to go into your cold storage private wallet and take your cryptocurrency like they can take money from your bank account or freeze your bank account. And they say that is going to fundamentally alter the power of a central government when they can no longer go in and expropriate funds like they can in bank accounts. That is going to lead to the demise, that along with debt. I mean, this is 1997, and they're talking about debt eventually ending the nation state system, just so far ahead of their time. But, obviously you see that kind of happening in the 90s, or some people did. So the nation state, they say, is going away during this next 500-year block of technological progress. And part of that is what they called it cyber money. But really, it's what we call cryptocurrencies today, or crypto assets. So I look at this, and I look at statements from the Trump campaign. When the Trump campaign came out and said, we're going to build some, they called them Liberty Cities. I haven't heard anything else about this. But the Trump campaign, maybe even Trump himself, said, look, we've got to go build these. We have to go build these tech cities from the ground up. We'll call them Liberty Cities. And apparently they want to go into federal lands and build these cities. I don't know. You might call them tech utopia. That idea probably comes directly from this book called The Sovereign Individual. This is why it's so critical for people to read this book and understand it. Because after the nation state goes away, we will have enclaves. That's what they say. Basically city states, or these enclaves, where they'll be high tech. They will compete for the most productive citizens. You'll go there. It's low tax. It's safe. And, obviously we get into a lot of gray areas, things that make people feel very uncomfortable, like surveillance, of course, and things that are certain security features where maybe you don't have privacy. Will there be totalitarian enclaves like this with persistent surveillance? Yeah, there will. Could there be an early America version where where civil liberties and security are both maximized? Yeah, probably. So at any rate, I just bring this up because so much of what I see coming out of the Trump campaign, the Trump family, the Trump administration is geared towards what you read in The Sovereign Individual. And they do a much better job than I do explaining what the future is probably going to look like. And then you get, Balaji in the nation, in the network state, and you get Duvall and all these other people talking about this. The book was really ahead of its time. It is probably the future of humanity. I highly recommend it. With that, we'll move on to the last item here. And this is something we've talked about for a long time, but I saw this quote from an energy watchdog. PJM interconnection, which you can see there, it runs from like Chicago over to New Jersey down to the Carolinas. This energy watchdog said that it has, quote, no new capacity to meet new loads. So it is out of capacity to meet rising demand at a time when demand is rising very rapidly. By the way, PJM is the country's largest power grid. And we've been beating this drum for nearly 2 years that the United States has a worsening energy problem, and it has gotten worse practically every month for years. This all stems from the Obama and Biden era policies. It's called Clean Power Plan and Clean Power Plan 2.0, respectively. And that forced fossil fuel-fired power plants into early retirement and made them uneconomical to run. At the same time, they're pouring massive amounts of investment and money, taxpayer money, into less reliable so-called green energy projects like wind and solar. Green energy requires 3 to 5 times the build-out of baseload fossil fuels to achieve the same reliability. There's just not enough of it being built to replace baseload generation, but this is exactly what Obama and then Biden were going for. Robert and I both came to the conclusion they probably did want brownouts and blackouts and energy problems because it's the Hegelian dialectic. It's the problem reaction solution. You have a problem. My power went out. You have the reaction. I want my power turned back on. And the solution is we're not going to build another coal plant, but if you just let us spend another $1 trillion, we'll put some solar panels out in the country. We'll chop down a bunch of trees, put some solar panels out there. We could turn your power back on. 100% that's what they wanted to do. The reality is it's just not realistic. Natural gas prices right now are, I don't know, $3.50, maybe $4, something like that. That is the equivalent of $24 a barrel oil, about a third roughly of what it is right now. So this is one reason why the Trump administration is pushing natural gas as well as coal power to produce electricity for the country. This can't be done overnight. It is just comically pathetic that the United States, we have to reindustrialize. We need to increase domestic production capacity. And this goes back to something that Michael Every said. He's a global strategist over at Rabobank. Really fantastic interview. If you haven't watched it yet, you should. It's up on the Ford Observer YouTube channel. It was back in May. He said, the United States has chosen financial services as its specialty. We make money off of money. China has chosen production as its specialty. And you just look at that and you say, well, who's going to win? Probably the country that can produce more stuff that it needs. And the reality is that not only can the United States not produce the quantity of what we need, we can't build enough ships, we can't build enough airframes, we can't build enough munitions. Not only can we not do that, we don't even have the electricity to try to build that stuff. Even if we wanted to, even if we could build new factories, there's just not enough juice in the system to do that. So not only is this going, and we've been warning people for 2 years, not only is this going to lead to planned and unplanned power outages, and this is not just when it's 105 degrees outside and you have a brownout because there's too much electricity demand on the grid. We're talking about just normal peak load conditions, not extreme heat, not extreme cold or extreme heat conditions. Not only is it going to lead to outages as new electricity demand surges, but I just want to show everyone this chart right quick. Jared. Energy prices in the United States, this is just the average price for a city. And this is from the Fred, which is Federal Reserve data. Energy prices are up over 40% in the past 5 years. There's absolutely zero reason to believe this trend is going to end. Your energy prices will continue to go up. That is a supply-demand problem. We don't have enough supply. We have increasing demand. Your prices will go up. Just as a reminder, the Midwest is at the highest risk for power shortfalls. Jared, can you go back to that map real quick, please? So that red section right there, the Midwest, that goes from parts of the Dakotas and Minnesota all the way down into Ohio and then parts of Louisiana and Arkansas there. That remains at the highest risk. PJM is also in what they call an elevated risk. And so this is something that by the way, is also from the North American Electricity Reliability Council, the NERC, from their latest annual outlook. So everyone should be planning for planned and unplanned out. Well, maybe not everyone. Look at this map. If your area is orange or red, you should absolutely be planning for planned or unplanned outages at the rate we are going. And with that, we'll hit the last item here. Oh, is that it? Okay, that's it. All right, Jared, with that, I think we do have some questions here.
Yep. We have a couple rolled over from yesterday. One from Jonathan Snodgrass. When the U.S. dollar stops being the world reserve currency and excess dollars are destroyed, could the U.S. dollar gain back its value instead of being hyperinflated?
Yeah, let me also just say this. Y'all ask a lot of good questions, and I do my best to share the knowledge that I have. It is obviously very deep in some areas and fairly shallow in other areas, but I try to give you the best answer that I can. And you should just consider this as perspective. This is my perspective. Not, obviously, what I'm going to start doing is if I can't hit a home run or a grand slam with your answer, I'm just going to tell you I don't know. Maybe provide a little bit of perspective. In terms of the dollar gaining value, the problem with the dollar gaining value is that it hurts exports, because when the price of the dollar goes up, price in foreign currencies, U.S. goods become far more expensive, and so that reduces your pricing power, it reduces your competitiveness in at U.S. exports. So I'm not sure that. I mean, the Trump administration definitely does not want the dollar to get stronger. They 100% want the dollar to get weaker in the interim. After all is said and done, after we go through this debt crisis, the dollar is going to be inflated away. There's really probably no way around it. There's really only two ways that you can solve a debt crisis, and it is through debt deflation or it's through debt inflation, deflation or inflation. The United States government is not going to default outright. There will be a lot of companies that default. There will be a lot of individuals that will default. So we will see some deflationary pressure there in the interim, because debt is money. And with debt, when you default on your debt, that money goes to zero. That debt is a promise to pay money in the future. And if it's money you don't have, you don't pay the debt, and it just evaporates. That's deflationary. On the other hand, the United States they are just going to choose, the Fed, the Treasury are just going to choose to print money. They're going to monetize the debt. If we go back, once the dollar loses world reserve currency, and it's probably not going to disappear from the entire world, but it will be displaced in certain parts of the world. Once we go through that, I'm not saying the dollar will go back to a gold standard. It probably won't. But if it did, I think that would be a very good move for dollar stability. But otherwise, we're going to have to go back to an interest rate controlled currency. And this is something that Ray Dalio talks about in this latest book. I think he has fantastic perspective on it, and that's definitely a question for him. But I just share with you my perspective. If it doesn't fully answer your question, then I can't answer it. Otherwise, great question.
All right. We're going to skip down a couple of these. We've covered them. From Mr. Bunny 0, EV use and AI data.
That's all right. Here, I'll grab this question right here. I feel like these nothing burger releases like MLK, Epstein are nothing but shiny objects to keep us busy. Am I being a conspiracy theorist? No, I think the MLK release today, those files, like 250,000 files, I think that is just to assuage some Trump voters and just, I told you all last week, I think we're not going to see the full Epstein files, but I said a partial release or some things that are heavily redacted, I think we probably will see. And then, I said that last week, and then Trump and Bondi both came out and said, okay, we're going to publish some of the grand jury files, like the depositions or whatever, transcripts. So I don't think you're being a conspiracy theorist, but yeah, I think this MLK drop, yesterday or last night or something, or this morning, probably 100% just to try to calm the waters of the Epstein files. And, Americans have short memories, they say, in politics. I don't think the Trump base is going to have a short memory on Epstein. Well, I think even the Trump base is fractured on this. You have some people that say, we should forget about Epstein. Trump is right. We should just forget this whole thing happened. That's old news. Why are we still talking about this? Let's move on. And then you have other people that say, the people at the highest levels of government, I don't care what country, I don't care what party or what team, you have to hold the people at the tip top accountable. And we're just not going to see the people at the tip top being held accountable. So effectively nothing will change. That's my take. Next question. Regarding the credible threat to Florida's retired SOF, the Army issued a duty to warn memo. Do you guys have any more info on this? I don't, but I saw that thing get shared around. A ton of people texted it to me, and I don't know exactly what it's over. But if you haven't seen it, the Army MPs, the provost marshal's office or something said, and by the way, I've seen people that say this is credible and they've confirmed it's true. I've not independently confirmed it, but I did have someone who is in active duty SOF right now text it to me, and apparently he thinks it's credible. Maybe he was sent that from his chain of command. I don't know. And I don't recall the specifics of what it said, but basically it said, hey, there's a threat out there. Someone's going to try to kill some active duty or retired special operations guys in Florida. And so I don't know. I don't have any other information, but the provost marshal's office put it out. So I'm sure there's a counterintelligence investigation into it. I'm sure they're on full alert. And, frankly, like, those guys are hard targets. I probably would not want to get that community riled up, frankly, but we'll see. Do the Druze in Syria have close ties to Israel and or the IDF? Can they be considered a potential proxy for Israel's interests in Syria? I don't know what their actual ties are, but I've just seen that Israel wants to defend them, and that may include annexing part of that Druze territory in southern Syria. That's not really something I can answer because I don't know much about the Druze. What's the source of the number of protests per day? So we scrape all the big protest sites, also social media, when there's protest action, direct action, anything, far left training, etc. We pull that data in and we map it every morning. And by the way, that map's available for subscribers. So if you would like to join us and get deeper access to that kind of intelligence, you can do that at forwardobserver.com. And so that's where that information comes from. We do it every day so you don't have to. All you have to do is look at the map, see if anything's in your area. If not, you move on. If something's in your area, zoom in, read about it, be warned. Maybe avoid that part of the city during that time. How do we combat like far left violent actions, like how we see them doing this militant action and ambushing police agencies? Well, here's the thing about monopoly on violence. This whole social contract, if you believe in it or not, it doesn't matter. But we kind of live on the social contract, which is that citizens of a country, especially in the United States, we give away certain powers to the state. And in return, the state is supposed to protect us. Obviously, the state cannot and does not. So I think the social contract's been violated, especially in cities where there's just no justice. You get robbed, you get assaulted, and someone gets arrested, and then they're out the next day. That is a travesty of justice. That is a direct violation of the social contract, if you believe in that. So you as an individual, there's probably very little that you can do. This is something that I would definitely leave to federal law enforcement. But one thing that we all can be doing in our local areas is organizing, or in this case, counter-organizing. If you look at low-intensity conflict, which is everything from violent social movements to some protest movements, terrorism, guerrilla movements, all the way up to and including popular revolution and insurgency. They all roughly follow a similar, or most of those forms of low-intensity conflict follows a similar progression. In phase one, it is organizing, and they're organizing people. They're building human infrastructure, sometimes physical infrastructure. They're developing their cadres, their political platforms, and a lot of that stuff is done beneath the overt level. So it's being done clandestinely or in secret. The best thing that you can be doing to combat a movement like that in the organization phase is to counter-organize against them. So what this would look like at your local level is effectively a social group or some group that comes together for a certain cause. That group has a purpose. And the purpose is to identify the individuals, identify the groups that are being formed, identify the cadre, identifying all of the human infrastructure that they need to ramp up protests, to ramp up direct action, to ramp up armed violence, maybe any form of violence. So it is like they're trying to organize their base to exert power. And the only way to stop that is through countervailing power, which means you have to organize your base with countervailing power to not allow them to pursue their course of action. And we'll just, it's a little more complicated than that, but we'll just leave that. Broadly, you can out-organize these movements at the local level. And at the organization phase, that is basically all you can do as an individual, is to build social power at the local level and keep the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. And that applies to a lot of things, not just far left organizing, a lot of bad things. So you should be organizing a social base where you live. And maybe we'll talk about that in a lot greater detail later. But great question. Crypto online services buy and hold crypto for you, but not actually own the coins they say you have. When the day comes for that to be reconciled and there are too few coins, what happens? Well, this gets into an issue of rehypothecation. It's a reason why, yeah, you can buy crypto on Robinhood, but yeah, you're right. You don't actually hold them. It's basically a custodial account. It's no different than a bank account. It's not really yours. If the Robinhood servers go down, your money's stuck. If you can't access the app or online, like your tokens are stuck. If there's some regulation problem or regulatory issue, so the hypothecation problem means that these platforms could be loaning out the tokens that you quote unquote own to someone else, maybe for the purpose of short selling. Maybe there's some kind of yield play where they loan this at 4%, but they stick it in this, they lock the tokens up over here for 5% or something like that. So if you want to own crypto, I would say probably don't buy it on Robinhood or somewhere else, or any place where you don't hold the keys. If you don't have a 12-word seed phrase, if you can't actually recover that wallet somewhere else, then you don't really own it. So it's a good question, but realistically, the only way to avoid that problem is just to own your tokens outright on a cold wallet. Does Bitcoin seem like a candidate for the next global reserve currency? No, definitely not. It will not be a currency like the dollar. No one goes out and spend, like very few people go out and actually spend Bitcoin. So they call it digital gold for a reason. And so in that way, it may be a reserve asset, but it won't be the global reserve currency because the capital markets and the credit markets are not large enough. Try going out and getting a loan for $20 million to buy commodities from some other country in Bitcoin. Try getting a $20 million loan in Bitcoin, whatever the equivalent of Bitcoin is. You probably can't do it. Or if you can, it's not very easy. So that right there tells you that the capital and credit markets just aren't large enough to be the global reserve currency. You also have to have a lot of people are willing to sell things in Bitcoin, but they're not willing to buy things in Bitcoin, which is a problem if you're trying to be a global reserve currency. So no, I think the dollar still remains the global reserve. The dollar system as we know it ends, and Bitcoin is not going to replace that. Bitcoin is going to be a currency that you hold, basically a hedge against. This is not just the dollar. Bitcoin is going to be a hedge for a lot of people against their own failing fiat money systems. Is there anything else that's poised to overcome the dollar? No, that's one of the things these big dollar advocates continue to say. There's nothing to replace it. What are you going to replace it with? I think there's an argument to be made on the other side of that says, well, you don't necessarily have to replace the dollar with anything. You just stop buying the dollar. You stop using dollars and maybe you use something else. But just in terms of a global reserve currency, there's nothing on the radar right now that will directly compete with a dollar. I know BRICS is talking in China, maybe even talking about a gold-backed currency or something like that. Yeah, maybe. I mean, then you're just basically swapping gold notes. But at least that currency is backed by something. Again, the problem with a gold-backed currency is there's not enough gold to build those large capital and credit markets. So you've either, who's going to loan you if it's not priced in dollars? Who's going to loan you the amount of anything that you're trying to trade in? That's my take. By the way, also, was it yesterday or earlier? People were talking about, oh, Bitcoin is just an inflation sink. It's just an inflation sink. They just made Bitcoin so people will buy it to sink their dollars in there to reduce inflation. Guys, every seller has a buyer. You cannot sell anything unless there's a buyer on the other end. So if you buy Bitcoin and your dollars don't evaporate. Your dollars go to someone else because they give you the Bitcoin, you give them your dollars. It does not sink inflation. It just moves around who has the dollars and who has the Bitcoin. And I forgot to say that yesterday. So Bitcoin's not an inflation sink. Is nuclear power actually going to make a comeback? I don't know. I know the Trump administration is trying to reduce the regulatory burdens in the permitting process, especially. I think in some cases, permitting may actually take longer than building the nuclear power plant itself. This is definitely a Robert question. Jared, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I think this is a fairly mature. What I've been saying as far as nuclear goes is that it's all about small modular reactors. So they have to be small, and you have to be able to. The modular is kind of a euphemism for just being commercialized. Basically, that is a fairly mature technology already with the advent of nuclear submarines. So it's a matter of which that is coming from the U.S. Navy, not me, but from the Navy itself. So it's just a matter of taking that technology and applying it to the commercial applications. And we just covered, I think it was the Energy Department said, hey, yeah, we're going to take off. We have a project by 2026. We want 3 options commercially made and available, ready for 2026. So will it make a comeback? I think they're going to at least push for it. And the hardest thing that's going to be there is what fuel do you put in it? But I have seen a few different spots where that's also trying to be addressed, both on the private side and on the regulatory side. We covered from the Department of Energy again, saying, hey, we're going for a program to help fuel this reactor program. Mm-hmm. So they're pushing for it. And I think they're going to succeed.
Let me just say one thing. The Trump administration at the federal level can push nuclear energy all they want. But the bottom line is that states also have a say in what gets built in their state. Maybe there's some federal act, some Energy Security Act or whatever I forget what the thing's called. And maybe the federal government can basically go through the courts and try to force this building. But if you're a state that doesn't want new pipelines running through your state, you can just tie that up indefinitely. You don't want a nuclear power plant built in your state. Okay, probably not getting built, or there's going to be a long, lengthy court battle over it. So this is not simply a problem of is there political will at the federal level. It is also, will states go along with it? And, realistically, that's just another thing that's hampering nuclear build out. All right, Jared, let's do running over again. Let's just do grab the best here. I'll answer this and then grab the next best question. Mike, have you read the Technological Republic by one of the co-founders of Palantir? So no, I have not, but I will check it out. Reading it now might be up your alley. The subtitle is Hard Power, Soft Belief in the Future of the West. Okay, I will definitely check out that book, not only because it was written by a Palantir co-founder, but because it seems like fairly in line with The Sovereign Individual, which again is a great book. I cannot recommend that book highly enough. If you want to understand the future, like if you want to set your grandkids up for success, you've got to read that book and start thinking about how you can move closer, because I do think that is the reality of the future, what that book describes. All right. What happens if rehypothecation occurs at a mass scale, and is there a shortfall preventing all Bitcoin owners from self-custody? So is there stock market historical analog? Yeah, if you own Bitcoin on say Robinhood or an exchange, that's basically like owning stock certificates. Okay, you kind of own Bitcoin, but really you just own a promissory note that says, yeah, you own this amount of Bitcoin. You don't actually own it. It's custodial at it. Someone else has custody of it, which means you don't actually own it. This whole issue of rehypothecation has come up. Allegedly, there are some gold repositories that have loaned more gold than they actually have. And so you have all these people buying gold, and the repository says, yep, you just pay us a monthly management service fee, and we will store your gold for you. And you can even, we have monthly audits. You can even take a look at it. The problem is, on paper, they have loaned gold to someone else. And maybe they've loaned one gold bar to two people. And again, this is not a physical exchange. This is another promissory note. This is another certificate. Yes, if you need to call this in, there is a gold bar that backs this loan. And the people who loan that gold pay money to the repository. So that's how the repository makes money on loaning these gold bars out on paper to other people, which is fine until there's a run on gold, until you have people in that gold repository say, no, I want my gold back, or I want it transferred somewhere else. And now all of a sudden, that repository has a major problem because they've got more gold bars loaned out outstanding than they actually physically have. So people have talked about that. I don't know how true that is. I'm sure it's true for some. I can't tell you more than that. There is a similar risk for maybe not Robinhood, but for maybe some of the other central, the exchanges, where, again, maybe there's a rehypothecation problem on your Bitcoin or other crypto assets, Ethereum, whatever, where it's been loaned out. More Bitcoin has been loaned out than that exchange actually has. So it is another reason why you should avoid that risk altogether. And I don't know if Ledger is still the thing to have, but a Ledger wallet, you can run, there's all sorts of private wallets that you can run, like Electrum. I don't even know if Electrum is still a thing, but Exodus wallet, there's a ton of them. Just own your own stuff. Just have your own stuff. If you're going to own it, really own it. All right. With that, everyone, that's going to do it for us. Listen, I think I've already seen some people be migrated. Some of our current members migrated over to the new Ford Observer website. We are at initial operating capacity there. So we're publishing intelligence throughout the day, and I'll be working on some, like this week, I'm working on a report for financial repression. What that is going to look like, could that help the United States avoid a debt crisis? If not, what is that debt crisis going to look like? How's financial repression, which are all these things just basically to manipulate bond prices, how's that going to affect you and your bank account and equities and bond markets and yields and interest rates? We're 100% going to live through that. I think we're basically already at some kind of canary in the coal mine moment now with something that the Fed passed through a couple of weeks ago that I talked about. This is going to be a new era for our fiscal and monetary system, and it's going to be painful for a lot of people. So I've got that report coming up this week, probably be published on Thursday, maybe Friday. If you want access to that, if you want access to investment bank data, if you want to know what hedge funds are telling their clients or telling their clients what they're doing and their strategies, just go to FordObserver.com, sign up. You get my economic early warning report. It comes out every Friday afternoon. And I talk about these economic, financial, and monetary issues that we are facing in the future. If you want to be educated, if you want to understand, if you want to widen your perspective on what we're going to live through in this country so that you can plan for it and be prepared for it and not be surprised for it, because 90% of Americans are going to be completely blindsided about this, go to FordObserver.com, sign up. Free 7-day trial. If nothing else, just sign up for free and get my report on financial repression that's going to come out this Thursday or Friday. That's like a must-read report. You have to understand what financial repression is and how it's going to affect you. So everyone, with that, that's going to do it for our morning briefing. We appreciate your support. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. And until then, be well and stay out front.